They found a cave in northern Spain where archaeologists have been digging for 30 years. In one of its layers, a compressed slice of sediment dated to 850,000 years ago, they keep finding human bones. Not arranged, not buried, scattered among the butchered remains of horses and deer, processed by stone tools in exactly the same way. In July 2025, a researcher pulled out a single neck bone belonging to a child between 2 and 4 years old. She turned it over and found 42 cut marks. Precise, controlled, placed along the exact anatomical points you would need to hit to separate a head cleanly from its body at the joint where the skull meets the spine. Not a carnivore, not an accident. Someone who knew the anatomy, someone who had done this before. Not carved by grief, not carved by ritual, carved with the same efficiency and the same stone tools used on the deer in the next layer over. A 2-year-old, processed like prey. My name's Joe, and what I'm about to show you is going to sit with you for a long time. Because this is not ancient history. This is the origin story of everything that comes next. Sierra de Atapuerca, Burgos Province, northern Spain. If you've never heard of this mountain range, here's what you need to know. It is a cave system. Grandolina, Cima del Elefante, Cima de los Huesos. Layer after layer of ancient sediment going back over 1 million years, each layer holding something older and harder to look at than the last. It is probably the most important human fossil site on the planet. Not because it shows us how we evolved, because it shows us what we were doing before we evolved far enough to pretend otherwise. Serious excavations started in 1994. A Spanish team led by Eudald Carbonell broke into level TD6 of the Grandolina cave and found human bones almost immediately. Not a skeleton, not a burial. Fragments from at least 6 individuals mixed in at random with the butchered remains of large animals. Horses, deer, rhinoceros, all processed by stone tools in the same layer. And the human bones showed exactly the same marks. Spiral fractures down the long bones from being split for marrow. Skulls opened along controlled lines to extract the brain matter. Cut marks at the muscle attachment points where flesh would be stripped. The same toolkit, the same techniques, the same outcome. The humans were not buried alongside the food. The humans were the food. By the time the team had fully worked through the TD6 material, they had confirmed remains from at least 11 individuals. Some estimates go higher. Adolescents, adults, that child, all of them processed. None of them placed with any care. None of them treated as anything other than a caloric resource. They named the species that lived here Homo antecessor, pioneer man, the first humans known to have colonized Western Europe, and the first species in the fossil record with hard evidence of systematically hunting and consuming other members of its own genus. Here is who pioneer man actually was, because you have to picture this clearly. They were not apes. They were not bent-backed creatures grunting in the dark. They stood 5.5 to 6 feet tall, fully upright. Brain volume between 1,000 and 1,150 cubic centimeters. Modern human average is around 1,300. They made and used stone tools. Some researchers believe their facial anatomy was closer to modern Homo sapiens than to the Neanderthals who came much later. The debate about exactly where they sit on the family tree is ongoing. The debate about what they did with their tools is not. They were here from around 1.2 million years ago to approximately 770,000 years ago. Nearly 500,000 years of occupation across Western Europe. And somewhere in the sediment record of that 500,000 years, hunting other humans became a routine part of how they fed themselves. Not a crisis response. Not one desperate winter. Multiple events layered through a dilated time sequence, showing the same practices repeated across what may have been generations. A study in Current Anthropology described it with the kind of careful academic language that hits harder the longer you sit with it. Hunting strategies and human meat consumption were frequent and habitual actions. Frequent, habitual. The anatomical precision of the cuts confirms this is not guesswork. To sever a head cleanly at the atlas joint, you have to know where you're cutting, the bone structure, the ligament positions, the exact angle of approach. That knowledge does not come from reading about it. It comes from practice, from doing it repeatedly until it becomes routine. Someone practiced that technique on a 2-year-old. The 2025 vertebra find changed something about how researchers are reading this site. Dr. Palmira Salati, who co-directs the Grandolina excavation, said after the find that every year they uncover something that forces them to rethink how these people lived, how they died, and how the dead were treated nearly 1 million years ago. What makes that statement hit different is the word forces. After 3 decades of excavation, after confirming 11 individuals, after publishing study after study on the butchery patterns, it is still possible to find one bone that forces you to rethink. The team believes there are more remains in the unexcavated sections of TD6 below the current dig. The number confirmed may be the floor, not the ceiling. And if this is the kind of history you want to understand, the actual biological record of what our genus has done, not the sanitized version, then subscribe right now. Because the next layer of this story goes from 850,000 years ago to 45,000 years ago. And it doesn't get cleaner, it gets specific. And the people in the next part of the story are ones you've already heard of. Hit subscribe. I'll be here when you come back. The Neanderthals. Let's set them up properly before we talk about what the bones say about them. Homo neanderthalensis evolved in Europe and Western Asia around 400,000 years ago. Not a primitive species in the old cartoon sense. They buried their dead. They wore jewelry. 8 eagle talons found at the Krapina cave in Croatia dated to 130,000 years ago. Bare cut marks and notches consistent with being strung into a necklace or bracelet, predating any modern human presence in Europe by tens of thousands of years. They cared for their injured, skeletal remains, show healed fractures that could only have been survived with assistance from others. They survived every ice age, every megafaunal extinction event, every climate shift that came their way for 400,000 years. By any reasonable measure, they were people. Complex, intelligent, socially bonded people. And then there was Goyet. Goyet Cave, Namur Province, southern Belgium. First excavated in 1867 by a paleontologist named Edouard Dupont. He pulled out enormous quantities of material, bones, tools, sediment layers, and spent years cataloging what he found. Many of the fragments he couldn't identify as any specific large animal went into storage at the Brussels Institute of Natural Sciences, where they sat in archival boxes for over 100 years. In 2004, a researcher started going through those boxes, properly this time. By 2016, an international team led by anthropologist Helene Rougier published their analysis in scientific reports. 99 of those fragments were Neanderthal bones, and 1/3 of them bore intentional butchery marks, cut marks, notches from percussion fracturing, circular impacts from being cracked open for the marrow inside. 4 of the Neanderthal bones had been repurposed as retouching tools, pressed against stone blades to sharpen them. Not as grave goods, not as memorials, as working material. The bones were scattered across the cave floor, mixed with horse bones and reindeer bones, processed in the same manner. Dated to between 40,500 and 45,500 years ago. A 2025 follow-up study went further. Paleogenetic and isotopic analysis identified a minimum of 6 individuals, at least 4 of them adult or adolescent females. The chemical signature of their bones showed they had not grown up locally. They had been brought to Goyet from somewhere else. The researchers described the most compelling evidence to date for intergroup competition among late Pleistocene Neanderthal populations. The question of who the cannibals were is technically still open. Another group of Neanderthals, perhaps, or the modern humans who had just started arriving in northern Europe for the first time. Because 45,000 years ago is exactly the window. Homo sapiens, out of Africa, reaching Europe. Neanderthals present, but declining. An overlap period that lasted somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 years. And at the end of it, the Neanderthals were gone. 300,000 years ago, there were somewhere between 9 and 12 distinct human species alive on Earth simultaneously. The Neanderthals across Europe, the Denisovans in Asia, Homo floresiensis on Indonesian islands, Homo naledi in South African caves, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines. All of them present. All with evidence of tool use, fire, social structure, some with burial practices, some with art. By 10,000 years ago, there was one. Us? That is not a geological extinction event. No asteroid. No single catastrophe. The timing of every one of those disappearances correlates with the spread of Homo sapiens into their territories. Researchers are careful not to overstate the case, but a 2019 Science Alert analysis of the pattern was direct about what the evidence showed. The disappearances resemble a mass extinction, but there is no obvious environmental catastrophe driving it. The timing suggests they were caused by the spread of one new species. That species is you. The physical evidence for direct violence is fragmentary, but real. A Neanderthal male from Saint-Césaire in France, dated to around 36,000 years ago, has a skull fracture consistent with a blow from a sharp implement. A Neanderthal from Shanidar Cave in Iraq, dated around 50,000 years ago, has a partially healed stab wound on a rib. Neither definitively names the attacker. Violence within Neanderthal communities is also documented. Without a massacre site where modern human tools are embedded in Neanderthal bone, nobody can say with certainty that we hunted them. What we can say is this: Neanderthals survived every pressure the world had thrown at them for 400,000 years. Then we arrived, and within 7,000 years of contact, they were gone. Tom Hyam at the University of Vienna noted in 2024 that in some areas of Europe, modern humans arrived to find spaces where there were no Neanderthals anymore, populations that had already collapsed before any direct encounter. The pressure may not have looked like open warfare. It may have looked like displacement, resource competition, and enough targeted violence at the margins to prevent fragmented populations from recovering. Slow collapse, not one battle, a sustained erosion, and then silence. Here's the part I want you to sit with, because the story does not end with their extinction. It ends inside you. If you are anywhere outside sub-Saharan Africa, European, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American, between 1 and 2% of your genome is Neanderthal DNA. A 2024 study from Berkeley and the Max Planck Institute analyzed 58 ancient Eurasian genomes and dated the interbreeding to a single extended period starting around 50,500 years ago, lasting approximately 7,000 years. A 2026 study published in Science found the interbreeding was strongly sex-biased, primarily male Neanderthals and female Homo sapiens. The researchers are careful about what to conclude from that, but the direction of the asymmetry is specific and it points somewhere uncomfortable. There are also Denisovan genes in populations across Asia and Oceania, an altitude adaptation that allows Tibetan populations to function at elevations where most humans cannot. That is a Denisovan gene, still working in a living human body right now. The species it came from left almost no fossil record, known almost entirely from a finger bone in a Siberian cave. Gone, and yet still here. We absorbed pieces of the species we erased. Their children died, and their lineages collapsed, but something of them survived by mixing into us. And every non-African person on Earth carries that inheritance without thinking about it. Go back to that vertebra, the Atlas joint, the 2-year-old in northern Spain, 850,000 years ago. The 42 cut marks made by someone who knew the anatomy well enough to be efficient at it. Whatever was in Pioneer Man that led to those marks was not the last time it appeared in the fossil record. We have Goyet 800,000 years later, showing the same practice on a different species by potentially a different species. We have the entire late Pleistocene record showing that wherever human groups encountered unfamiliar human groups, the results trended violent and frequently terminal for the smaller population. This is not one aberrant species acting outside the norm. This is a pattern running through the genus for nearly 1 million years of evidence, and it produced us, the species that ended up alone, the most effective iteration of something very old, the one that learned, at some point that the fossil record cannot precisely locate, to treat members of other groups as people rather than prey, most of the time. Mostly, the site at Grandolina is still being excavated. Every summer the team goes back. Every summer the tray of bones gets a little fuller. The 2025 vertebra was not the last word. The researchers believe there are more remains below the current floor, and the numbers will change again. And the question that the bones keep asking is the same one they have been asking since 1994. When exactly did this stop being normal? We still do not have a clean answer. We have cut marks. We have 42 of them on a child's neck bone. And we have the fact that you exist, which means something changed. You just watched a video asking what it was. That question is worth sitting with for longer than the runtime. If this opens something in you, if you feel unsettled or angry or like you're looking at your own reflection in something you'd rather not see, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Every video here is the real record, the bones and the science and the questions that have no comfortable answers. Subscribe and drop a comment below telling me what part of this landed hardest. Tell me if it changed how you think about the other human species we shared this planet with. Tell me if it made you think about something closer than 850,000 years ago. I want to know, because those conversations are the only reason to make videos like this one.